I used to think there were only two kinds of questions in the world, the ones that had answers, and the ones that didn't matter. That's how I built my life, on logic, pattern, data, precision. If it couldn't be quantified, modeled, tested, I didn't have time for it until one Wednesday morning, just after sunrise. My 5-year-old son walked into the kitchen, climbed onto my lap, and asked a question that wasn't on any whiteboard. "Daddy, what's the place before this place?" At first I smiled, thought maybe it was a dream, a leftover from some cartoon or bedtime story. But he wasn't joking. He wasn't even fully awake, and yet, his voice was steady, like he wasn't guessing. He was remembering. He told me about a river that flowed upward, about a place where colors didn't make sense, but felt like music, and about someone made of light, who asked him one thing: "What will you bring back?" I laughed, awkwardly, tried to brush it off, but part of me, the part I'd spent years ignoring, suddenly listened. Because deep down I remembered something too. Not a dream, not a vision, just a question I once asked when I was about his age: what if there's more than what we can see? This story isn't about proving anything. It's not about religion or belief or changing minds. It's about a moment, a quiet, unexpected one, when the most rational man I knew, myself, was reminded of something I had long abandoned: wonder. So if you've ever felt like life's been too loud to hear what really matters, stay. You're in the right place. And if this story moves something in you, like, comment, or subscribe. Not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe, you've been carrying a question too. He told me things that morning I wasn't ready to hear, not because they were strange, but because they were too familiar. Like someone playing a melody you hadn't heard in years, but somehow still remembered every note. He said, "I was flying, but not with wings. There was music, but it didn't come from anywhere. There was a river, Daddy, and it went up, not down." What kind of child says that? He wasn't performing, he wasn't trying to impress me, he just said it the way a child says, "It's raining outside." It was a knowing, not an imagining. And then he said something I still can't shake. He looked me in the eyes, his small, half-sleepy eyes, and whispered. He asked me what I wanted to bring back. I asked him who. He said, "The man." He glowed, but not like lights, more like how the sun feels when you're really cold. And then he paused, hugged his stuffed owl a little tighter, and added softly, "His face looked like fire and sky." I couldn't speak. Because there was a part of me, buried under layers of responsibility, of launch calendars, of Mars projections and AI protocols, that remembered something like that, but I had stopped listening to that part of myself a long time ago. So I did what grown-ups do when a child says something holy. I smiled. I nodded, and I told him it was a beautiful dream, but he looked at me and shook his head. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't sleeping in it. I was awake, there. I laughed, nervously, still trying to stay in control of the moment, still clinging to the idea that I was the one holding the wisdom in the room. But I wasn't. Not that day, and not for many days after. That night, after he fell asleep, I found his drawings. He had been quiet that afternoon, sitting with crayons and a stack of paper. Normally he drew rockets, robots, dinosaurs with jetpacks. But this time he drew light, circles within circles, skies with doors in them, people made of color, not skin, a tree with no leaves but roots, golden roots, that grew upward into the clouds. And on one page, in his messy 5-year-old handwriting, a line of words that made my chest ache. I didn't bring anything back yet. Like he planned to. Like this was just the beginning. I took that drawing to my study and stared at it for hours. Not because I thought there was a message in it, not because I was trying to analyze, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt small. Not small in a defeated way, small in a true way. Like standing at the edge of the ocean and realizing how long you've been pretending it was a puddle. The next morning he asked me if he could draw again. He didn't ask for help, didn't want toys, just crayons. This time he drew a door, floating in the sky, surrounded by stars that didn't look like stars. They looked like eyes. And underneath it, in tiny letters, It's not locked. We just forget how to knock. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain. I stopped trying to teach him what was real, and I started listening. Later that week, I asked him if he remembered how he got there. He said, "I closed my eyes, but not the ones on my face." Then he touched his chest and said, "These ones. I've spent my life building things, shuttles, satellites, systems that think faster than thought itself, but nothing I ever built could touch what he said next. I think I was somewhere before I came here." He didn't say it like a child trying to be deep. He said it like a fact, like gravity. And I realized something. He wasn't just telling me about a dream. He was handing me something. A memory I had once carried. A memory I had traded for certainty. He was holding it out to me with crayon-stained fingers and sleepy eyes, as if to say, "Here, you dropped this." This story, it's not about belief. It's not about who's right or what's provable or what fits neatly into a scientific paper. It's about the fact that sometimes the smallest voices in the room hold the truths the grown-ups forgot how to hear. So, if you've ever felt like you left something behind, something you didn't mean to lose, something soft and old and powerful, stay with me. Just maybe, the child inside you is still whispering, waiting for you to remember. I used to think signs came with sirens, with blinking lights, loud voices, data, something measurable. But ever since that morning, the world had started whispering differently, and I had started listening differently. It began with his drawings. Every day, just after breakfast, he would quietly pull out crayons and paper. No cartoons, no tablet time, no prompting. He'd sit at the edge of the kitchen table, legs swinging, head tilted slightly, like he was hearing something I couldn't. He drew not like a child learning shapes, but like someone remembering something carefully. Circles became spirals. Trees reached not downward but upward. People had no faces, only color. Vibrating shades of gold and deep indigo. Doors floated in the sky. Bridges had no beginnings. One morning he drew something that stopped me cold. 2 hands, one of flame, one of shadow, gently holding a cracked globe between them. Not fighting, not breaking, balancing. Above the image, written in careful block letters, "It's not broken, it's becoming." I stood there for a long time, staring at that page. It looked like something you'd find carved into the wall of a temple, not drawn by a 5-year-old with a crayon. And then there were his questions, not the usual kind. Not, "Why is the sky blue?" or "How do planes fly?" No, he asked things like, "Do trees miss heaven when they grow here? If a star forgets how to shine, can it still be called a star? Daddy, why do people stop hearing what the quiet says?" I had no answers. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to give any, because I realized he wasn't asking to be taught. He was inviting me to remember. One night I walked past his room and saw the door cracked open. The hallway was dark, the house quiet. Inside, he was asleep, curled up under a navy blanket, his owl tucked beneath his chin. But the walls were covered in drawings. He had taped them up, overlapping edges, crooked angles, like stained glass windows made of memory. Dozens of them, maybe more, each one different, but somehow consistent. Cities in the clouds, bridges of light, a hallway made of stars, eyes in the sky, a river that flowed up, and, in almost every drawing, a single figure, tall, shimmering, without a face, sometimes with wings, sometimes just a flame where the heart should be. He never named the figure, never described it twice the same way, but he always called it the man who asked me. I don't know when I stopped seeing these things as imagination. Maybe it was the morning I found him in the garden. He was just sitting there, legs crossed in the grass, his owl beside him. The sky above us was soft with early light. I walked out, knelt beside him. "What are you thinking about, buddy?" I asked. He didn't look at me, he just said, "He's watching us again." I paused. Watching like, looking? He shook his head, slow. Not like eyes, more like feeling us. Like when you listen without your ears. There are moments you don't plan for, moments that slip past all the logic and systems and strength you've built up, and settle directly in the part of you that's still a child. That was one of them. I didn't try to analyze it. I didn't say anything clever. I just sat beside him, in the silence, And for the first time in I don't know how long, I let myself be quiet without trying to fill the space. That night, I opened a locked drawer in my study, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a letter. Faded ink, my mother's handwriting. She'd given it to me when I turned 18. Elon, you've always been brilliant, but don't forget the child who used to stare at the stars and wonder if someone was staring back. I read it twice, then folded it slowly. My hands trembled, not from fear but from remembering. Me. Because something inside me stirred, like a room being unlocked with a key I hadn't known I still carried. He never said it outright, never claimed he was special, never tried to preach or persuade, but through his silence, his questions, his drawings, he was bringing something back, and deep down I think I was starting to follow him home. It happened one evening just after the world had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like the pause between heartbeats. He was on the couch drawing again, this time slower, more deliberate. I sat across from him, pretending to read but really just watching, trying to understand this child I'd helped bring into the world, and yet somehow felt like I was only now beginning to meet. He looked up suddenly and asked, "Daddy? Do you remember before you were here?" I froze. It wasn't a "where were you born" kind of question. He wasn't asking for stories. He was asking if I remembered, like he remembered. I smiled faintly. "No, buddy. I don't think I do." He nodded, not disappointed, just knowing. Then he said, "It's okay, a lot of people forget. That's why they get scared." I leaned forward. "Scared of what?" He looked at me. Really looked, not like a child looking at his parent, but like someone peering into a window that had been closed for too long. Of disappearing, of being small, of not being loved anymore once they stopped doing big things. The room spun a little. I had spent my life building big things, changing industries, designing the future. But here, in the stillness of my own living room, my 5-year-old son had just named the fear I hadn't admitted even to myself. There was a long silence. He kept drawing. I stared at my hands. And then, without looking up, he whispered, "He told me." "Who did?" "The man in the place before. He said my daddy is afraid of forgetting who he was. Before the world made him famous." That was when I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but something inside me softened. The armor I didn't know I'd been wearing for decades cracked. Just enough. I got down on the floor beside him. Not like a parent correcting. Not like a teacher explaining. Just a man trying to remember how to kneel. "Buddy," I said quietly, "how do you remember it so clearly?" He kept drawing, then replied, "Because I haven't been here long enough to forget." His voice was so gentle, so matter-of-fact, that it felt less like an answer and more like a mirror. He paused, then looked up again. His eyes were bright, but not in the way kids' eyes usually are. There was depth in them. Stillness. Almost sadness. "Daddy, do you know why I asked him to let you see?" That stopped me. "You asked him?" He nodded. "I told him my dad forgot how to feel the real light, the kind that doesn't come from a screen or a rocket or a win." My throat tightened. "And what did he say?" X looked down at his paper, then said, "He said, your dad will remember when he sees without needing proof." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because how do you respond to that when every breakthrough you've ever made has come from seeking proof? That night, after he fell asleep, I opened a journal I hadn't touched in years. Buried near the back, between algorithm sketches and scribbled orbit models, was a single page. A letter. To God, written by a 10-year-old version of me. "If you're real, please just make it not hurt anymore. I'll believe in you forever." I read it again. And this time, I didn't scoff. Because the man who built systems that mapped stars and launched satellites was suddenly sitting in the dark, wishing he could map his way back to the boy who wrote that letter. The next morning, I found him in the garden again. He was barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, humming something wordless. I sat beside him without saying a word. We just watched the light shift through the trees, and then, after a while, he spoke. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "If someone loses their way home, does it help if someone else remembers the path?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, buddy, it helps a lot. He leaned into my side, didn't say anything else, and we sat there, a man who had forgotten, and a child who hadn't been here long enough to forget. Two travelers, not ahead or behind each other, just walking different parts of the same road. I used to think change happened during big moments, major decisions, explosive revelations, headlines. But I was wrong. The moment that changed everything for me didn't come from a crisis or a discovery or even a question from my son. It came from another child, a boy I didn't know, in a place no one talked about. It was a Tuesday, late fall. Rain on the forecast. I canceled 2 meetings that morning, one with SpaceX R&D, the other with the UN climate panel. I didn't tell anyone why. It didn't try to justify it with numbers. I just knew I needed to go. The hospice was tucked away on a hill in Santa Fe, no signs, no branding. Just a gravel path, a wooden porch, and the faint scent of lavender and old trees. The volunteer at the door didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't say, "Oh my God, you're Elon Musk." She just looked at me, into me, and said, "You're here for the quiet ones, aren't you?" I nodded. For once in my life, I didn't need to speak to be understood. She led me down a quiet hallway, the kind where sound itself feels hesitant to echo room 12. There was no hum of machines, no monitors blinking. Just the gentle breathing of a 7-year-old boy beneath a quilt, with little rocket ships. His name was Jeremiah. He had been diagnosed at 4. His parents couldn't visit anymore. Too far, too complicated, too painful. He had no one, the nurse had whispered, except, now he had me. And something I brought with me. I knelt beside the bed, pulled out the drawing from my coat pocket. It was one of X's, his latest. A hallway made of light, stretching toward the sky. Children walking forward with stars in their eyes, adults turned backward, faces hidden in shadow. And at the very end, a single door floating. I flipped the page over. I had written one sentence. I don't know what heaven looks like, but my son says it feels like love that hugs you without touching. I placed the drawing on the nightstand, not as a gesture, not as a symbol, but as a key, a kind of permission. "It's for you," I whispered. Jeremiah didn't move. His eyes were closed, chest rising gently, peacefully, but the room felt fuller, like someone else had stepped in behind me, or maybe above me. I didn't stay long, didn't need to, because that moment, kneeling beside a child who may never know my name but might carry a picture into eternity, was enough to reroute something in me I hadn't known was off course. That night, I came home just past midnight. The house was dark, the hum of standby systems low and reverent. I found X curled on the couch, wrapped in his blanket, one foot hanging off the edge. The owl was on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. I sat beside him. Didn't wake him. Just listened. To the silence, to the peace, to the space between what we know and what we feel. And then, slowly he stirred. Eyes half open, voice groggy. "Did you go?" he asked. I nodded. "To the place with the boy?" "Yes," I said. I gave him the picture. He smiled. Just slightly. "Good," he murmured. "That one's the closest." Closest to what? To what I saw before I came here. He drifted back to sleep, but I stayed awake, because that night I realized my son hadn't brought back answers. He had brought back a doorway. One I could walk through, if I stopped looking for control and just remembered how to kneel. And another child, one I may never see again, had become the one to hold the handle open for me. Not with words, not with science, just by being there. Just by existing at the edge of both worlds. Some people bring rockets to the stars. Others bring crayons to the forgotten. And sometimes, that's the mission that matters most. I didn't work the next day. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I opened my laptop and closed it without typing a word. Not because I didn't have deadlines or emails or 1,000 people waiting for me to give direction, but because something inside me was no longer interested in being efficient. Something inside me just wanted to feel. I walked the hallways of the house like a man visiting someone else's life. The floors, the lights, the systems, all designed by me, for me, all smart, precise, predictable, and suddenly they felt hollow. As if they only sounded like a home, but had forgotten how to feel like one. I stood in the kitchen, where X had first whispered about the place before this place, and I whispered something too. Not to him, not to anyone, just into the silence. Please, don't let me forget again. That night, I found him asleep with a new drawing on his chest. It showed the earth cracked, not shattered, floating between two hands, one of fire, one of shadow, holding, not destroying, and above them, a golden face. My face, but with eyes not mine. They were empty, but not blind. They were full of stars. I asked him about it in the morning. He simply said, "That's what you looked like before you forgot how to feel." I almost laughed, almost cried. Instead, I just sat beside him and let the moment unfold. "Do you think I can remember again?" I asked. He looked up, so matter of fact. "You already are. That's why it hurts." That was the moment something shifted in me, not like a switch, more like a thread finally giving way after years of tension. I didn't collapse, I didn't break, I just softened. The sharp edges of my mind dulled, the speed I worshipped slowed, and for the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. It welcomed me. I began doing strange things after that. Things I once considered impractical, sentimental, unnecessary. I started watching sunrises. I started walking barefoot in the garden with him. I started lighting a candle before bedtime, not for light, but for stillness. And one evening, I found myself standing alone in my study, holding an old drawing he had taped to my desk. A golden hallway. Children walking forward, adults turning back. At the end, a door with no handle, and above it 4 words he had written months ago. "You remember by returning." I sat down, picked up a pen and wrote a letter, not to NASA, not to my board, to myself, to the boy I used to be, the one who once looked up at the stars and whispered, "If you're real, please don't let it hurt anymore." I didn't sign the letter because it wasn't from Elon Musk. It was from something older, something deeper, the part of me that had never forgotten, only fallen asleep. That night, while tucking X into bed, I whispered, "Thank you for not letting me stay asleep." He smiled with his eyes half closed and said something I'll never forget. "I didn't wake you up. I just reminded you where the door was. I used to think the most powerful things were the ones that changed the world. Now, I think it's the ones that change the way we see the world. This isn't a story about heaven, or a child genius, or a man who turned his life around in one dramatic moment. No, it's a story about something much quieter. Something most of us carry, then bury, then one day, if we're lucky, remember." I remembered. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough to hear music in silence again. Enough to look at the stars and feel not small, but invited. Enough to sit beside my son and not need to teach or explain. Just listen. He still draws. He still hums songs no one else knows. Still speaks in phrases that feel older than he is. But now, I don't try to make sense of them. I just make space for them. Because some truths don't need to be understood, they need to be honored. The boy who once looked to the stars and begged for pain to stop, grew into a man who believed only in systems, and now, he's learning again how to believe in wonder, not because it's logical, but because it's true. This story found you. If it stirred something quiet in you, or made you remember a part of yourself you'd forgotten, don't rush away. Sit with it. Reread the drawing in your mind. Ask the question, what have I been carrying all this time that was never mine to begin with? And when you're ready, return. Because sometimes the most important journeys aren't about going farther. They're about coming home.